Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are setting the stage for a truly fascinating deep dive into the intersection of ancient spirituality and our hyper-modern society. If you've ever found yourself wondering how traditional belief systems can possibly survive, let alone thrive, in an era of such rapid technological and social change, well, you are in exactly the right place. But hey, before we even touch the philosophy, let's look at a cold, hard number. 1/4, eventually rising to 1/3. That is the projected ratio of the elderly population in modern nations. Think about that for a second. It's a massive, completely unavoidable structural shift. And as our source material points out, it's a physical reality that forces a total reevaluation of how our society functions. I mean, any belief system or institution that just ignores this demographic tidal wave, they're going to be completely left behind. So let's get right into it. The source for our explainer today is The Laws of Miracles by Ryuho Okawa. We're focusing heavily on the arguments laid out in Chapter 3, which is all about the new winds of religion. This chapter sets up an incredibly high-stakes dilemma. How exactly does faith hold on to its core identity in the 21st century without being crushed by modern secular forces? It's this brilliant look at adaptation versus assimilation, and the blueprint it offers is just profoundly relevant for us today. To unpack this blueprint, here's our roadmap. We've got 4 main stops to break down this balancing act. First, demographic realities. Second, religion and politics. Third, coexistence with economics. And finally, science and mystery. All right, stop number 1. Demographic realities. We're looking at the actual tangible shifts in our population and what that inevitably means for our traditional social structures. The core of the problem here is basically simple math, right? You've got a society facing a rapidly declining birth rate, hitting an aging population head-on. You just can't rely on outdated societal models anymore. If the state tries to step in and take over everything, the math literally does not work. There simply aren't enough young workers to carry that kind of tax burden without triggering massive economic stagnation. So what's the fix? Well, the author argues that if a nation relies completely on Western-style state intervention, taxes are going to rocket to the moon just to support the elderly. The proposed alternative is actually a revival of community resilience. We're talking about a return to family values and good old-fashioned neighborhood mutual aid. Instead of waiting for a nationalized bailout, creating a culture of organic, mutual support at the local level isn't just nice to have. It's an absolute necessity for survival in the 21st century. Which naturally leads us right into our second pillar: religion and politics, and the intense challenge of finding the right distance. It really forces us to ask this fantastic question. Should spiritual movements stay entirely out of government, or should they fuse with it completely? The text contrasts these two extremes beautifully. It's like walking a tightrope. On one side, you have complete isolation, totally withdrawing from the world to go meditate on a mountaintop. On the other side, total political assimilation. If a religious institution ignores society's rules entirely, it loses all its relevance. But if it becomes hopelessly tangled up in daily partisan politics, it risks losing its very soul. And the text issues a massive red flag here. If religion gets too absorbed in daily political maneuvering, it loses its purity. It degrades into what the author literally calls a mere vote-gathering machine. Total fusion with politics strips an institution of its ability to actually inspire people. You're basically reducing a grand, transcendent philosophy down to a basic political operative, which defeats the whole purpose. To avoid that trap, the text proposes a political middle path. The ideal approach? Maintain your independence so you aren't swallowed whole by a political party. Offer heavenly, forward-thinking inspiration, meaning introduce elevated ideas long before the mainstream catches on. And, crucially, entirely reject violent revolution. The goal is to peacefully guide society's progress, not to forcefully overthrow the state. Now, this delicate balancing act extends right into the financial realm for Pillar 3, coexistence with economics. Here we're exploring that historic, deeply rooted tension between ancient asceticism, the old idea of rejecting wealth for purity, and modern capitalism. Talk about a rock and a hard place. If a modern belief system completely rejects the market economy, its believers will literally starve. I mean, they simply will not survive in modern society. But on the flip side, if the institution becomes obsessed with profit-centric greed and stock market gains, it completely destroys its core philosophy. It just becomes another profit-hungry corporation. The answer provided here is building what's called an open system. Basically, you need enough tolerance and flexibility to interact with market principles, to actively participate in the economy,
while simultaneously retaining a strong, independent identity. It requires a resilient structure. Because, let's face it, economic fluctuations and market crashes are going to happen, and your spiritual foundation can't collapse just because the stock prices did.
And that brings us to the fourth, and arguably the most philosophical pillar of our explainer today: science and mystery. It's the ultimate modern question, isn't it? Can a 21st century mind genuinely hold space for both astrophysics and the afterlife? Once again, the author warns us against two major historical potholes. On one side, blind superstition. Think back to when historical institutions stubbornly refused to accept that the Earth revolves around the sun. We absolutely have to accept scientific progress. There's no going backward. But on the other extreme, we face the modern danger: pure materialism, going so deep into hyper-rationalism that you completely strip the world of all its mystery. To highlight just how extreme this modern materialism has gotten, there's this wildly ironic quote from the text: "Souls are old-fashioned." The author points out that today there are actual priests out there guarding graves and reciting sutras who privately believe that the concept of a soul is totally outdated. It's kind of funny, honestly, but it's also a biting critique of how deeply hyper-rationalism has infiltrated the very professions meant to protect the spiritual. To combat this, the author draws an unyielding line in the sand. Yes, we absolutely must embrace the progress of science, but the fundamental truth that humans are spiritual beings and that the soul exists, that is the definitive boundary. Surrendering that core mystery to rationalism isn't adaptation, the text argues. It's a fundamental defeat of religion itself. Okay, synthesis, the new wind. We've covered a ton of ground across demographics, politics, economics, and science. Let's pull all these threads together to reveal the overarching blueprint for navigating the future. When you step back and look at the whole picture, a remarkably elegant framework emerges. In politics, avoid being a vote-gathering machine. Provide independent inspiration instead. In economics, don't starve, but avoid pure greed. Build an open, resilient system. In science, reject blind superstition and pure materialism. Accept progress while firmly defending the existence of the soul. It's highly structured and yet surprisingly practical for navigating modernity. The ultimate thesis of Chapter 3 is crystal clear. To breathe this new wind into the 21st century, a belief system has to be an open system. It has to fully support the development of politics, economics, and science without totally assimilating into them. It's all about maintaining that unique perspective and that core, mysterious identity while engaging fully with the modern world. Which brings us to the big, overarching question for today's explainer. Based on the framework we just unpacked, the challenge is pretty clearly set for all of us. Can humanity build a future where hyper-technological progress and deep spiritual mystery don't just battle each other, but actually coexist in a balanced, open system? It's a massive question to ponder as we move forward. Thank you so much for joining me to unpack this text today, and keep seeking those answers.